when I was asked by Jos to moderate this panel, I first asked, should I do this? Because this was supposed to be an all-female panel, and then you still got this guy moderating, right? That's not okay, or is it okay? And maybe we should move beyond this whole gender thing. But we will be talking about women in cycling, so it will be you talking, and I will limit myself to asking questions. But before we start talking about this, maybe we should do a short round of introduction, and again. Again, we start, Anna-Karina, with you.
Hello again.
And don't forget, there may be new people in the room, you know?
Exactly. So I'm going to introduce myself again. I'm Anna-Karina. I'm Policy and Communications Officer at the European Cyclists Federation, and we're the civil society voice of cycling on the pan-European level. And a lot of the work I do at ECF revolves around cargo bike, but I also do the communications for the Velocity Conference, which some of you may know.
My name is Eva. I'm with Dr. Beyk. We have a cargo bike shop here in Amsterdam. My husband has been running Dr. Bikes for 25 years, one of the first to start selling cargo bikes in Amsterdam, and we always try to be on the forefront of selling good quality cargo bikes for every kind of need.
My name is Natalia Tomiyama. I'm a co-founder and managing director of Nüwiel. Our stand is there, the green trailer, and we make electric trailers for bikes, for last mile logistics. And the beauty of our trailer is that it disappears behind you and it enables you to move 300 kilograms without making any effort.
Hi, my name is Conneller, and I founded a business called Cycle Chic 16 years ago to really address the gender gap in cycling in the UK. And most recently, we've launched a campaign in partnership with Loud Mobility called She is Electric, which is really trying to harness the power of electric bikes to enable more women to cycle, electric bikes and electric cargo bikes.
Thank you all. Kaz, you showed us, before lunch, you showed us some statistics about women cycling in the UK. Now, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, there are 3 countries in the world where actually women cycle more than men, which is this country, Denmark, and Japan. Can I ask you all to reflect on that? What makes just those 3 countries? Why do women cycle more there than men?
I could talk about why perhaps we have problems in the UK and why we have those, these really low numbers and the gender gap, and just the contrast of coming here. And myself and my business partner cycled here from London. We got the ferry, and I'm just literally astounded at the cycling infrastructure here. It blew me away. I'd heard that there was great cycling infrastructure, but I hadn't cycled in the Netherlands. And I just can't get over the scale of it and the connectivity. And we just do not have that in the UK. And so a lot of, not just women, obviously, but through my business, what I've discovered is that fear of safety is the biggest barrier. And because there is very little infrastructure, very few segregated cycle lanes, a huge proportion of women, it's just a massive no-no to cycle amongst traffic on busy roads. So I think that for me is the key difference. It's not the only factor, but it's such a big factor that really, I guess, enables it to become mainstream.
Natalia.
I'm half Japanese, so I can just provide, and I live in Germany in Europe, so I can just provide my opinion, my view. And I think what is similar between Denmark and the Netherlands, it's cycling history and well-developed cycling infrastructure. It's one thing, but another thing that I would always think about, and I think that's what you mentioned. I think it's a mentality and cycling culture. In the Netherlands and Denmark, you used to, as a child, brought by your parents in the backseats in a cargo bike to your school, to the kindergarten. In fact, when you're a child, you cycle to the school yourself. And the school's organizing how, safety, how to cycle. So there is a long tradition and there is a training starting from a very, very young age. So your parents are aware, your parents are cycling, you as a kid see them as a role model, and you're used to cycling. There is just what is the most sustainable, the fastest, the efficient and fun way. It's cycling, it's not driving. And Japan is different, it's so far away. But I think my perspective on Japan, it is their e-bike movement started a long time ago, before actually it came to Europe. I don't know when exactly, I think, but 20, 30 years ago, they started building e-bikes and introducing their society. And in Japan, it is so that women most often doing the daily routine logistics, picking up the kids, doing the groceries, all other things. So they have a lot of plenty time during the day, and their trips normally are within the city. So it's not more than 5 kilometers, and it doesn't make sense to drive in Japan. And they have really good e-bikes. They have great roads. So I think this is what unites these countries, and this willingness of Japan to introduce e-bikes long time ago, before I think it started in Europe.
Yeah, I didn't think about the difference between men and women on the bike, because from my perspective, I didn't realize that there was a gender gap in other countries. So I thought about it for a couple of days, and I do think infrastructure is the main factor. I do also think that in Amsterdam or in Holland in general, the Oma fiets and certain models of bikes that are very typical to the Dutch cycling scene are a little bit more accessible for women as well, perhaps. That the sporty bikes, which are more common in other countries, are maybe a little bit less accessible for women. So that might be something that producers of bikes might have to consider, that if it's a very high frame, it's harder for women. So from a factory perspective, I think that could make a difference as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to add to that, like all these 3 countries just have the excellent infrastructure in common. Like when I arrived here in Amsterdam, I was just so happy to just get out of the train station, start cycling without having to think about safety, about SUVs, about cars, or being antagonized as a cyclist or being overtaken with too little distance. So it did feel empowering, and it was also just so amazing to see so many women on bike lanes, so many different types of bikes, children, elderly people. So that itself is empowering, because it's about representation and seeing other women out there cycling. So the whole culture plays to that. And maybe just to add, because we often say that in cycling, where in countries where maybe the infrastructure is not as developed, you mainly have men cycling, but it's also only a fraction of men that cycle in those countries. So if you make infrastructure for women and make it inclusive, it benefits everyone, also including men.
We'll take this back to Valerie. You can introduce yourself, but did you catch the question?
If you can just repeat it, that would help me.
The question was, how come that just a couple of countries, the Netherlands, Denmark, Japan, where actually more women than men are cycling? So these are the odd ones out.
Okay. Yeah. So hi, apologies for being a bit late. I'm Valerie from Wahu. Can I get a Wahoo? And I'm from Ghana. So Ghana's an interesting place in terms of the dynamics between men and women riding. And I think the difference that I really see, or the barriers, are maybe 3 main things. So one is, you mentioned representation. So you would hardly see a woman like older than 35 cycling. And so it's something that you wouldn't have seen the generation before us doing. So now when you see women cycling, it's a new thing for our generation. I think the second thing is around safety. So we don't have any, well, we have 1 bike lane in Accra. Beyond that, there's no infrastructure. So that's also an impediment. But actually, we have a lot more off-road lanes, which I think are best suited for bicycles. So in that case, there's a bit more education around where can you ride safely. And I think the final thing for me is around cost. In very low-income communities where there's limited income, you typically see people would buy a smartphone for potentially their sons, or a bicycle potentially for their sons. So this is one of the other nuances around, because they feel that the boys can use the asset for revenue generation, typically the allocation of that type of asset will go to men rather than women. So as there are more opportunities for women to use bikes for commercial purposes, I also think that would be a catalyst for change.
Thank you, Valerie. Please keep the mic, because we all know that in the cycle industry, there is a male bias. Male designers design bikes for male consumers. I suppose it's even worse in the cargo bike industry, because we're talking heavy-duty vehicles. Is that part of the reason behind the limited uptake by cycling, cargo bikes, etc., among women? And what should the industry be doing about this? And we have some industry players on the stage here, so please.
So I think this is an exciting part for me, because in Africa, our industry for e-bikes is new. So for somebody who's leading a new venture in a new industry, I feel a bit of a responsibility to also ensure that I recruit women as designers, women as manufacturers into my team. So I think it's something that you would see, particularly in the e-mobility space. We're being very deliberate about making sure we also don't make that kind of challenge as we grow the industry. Yeah.
Thanks.
And if one of you wants to intervene or direct immediately, just make a move, grab the mic. And
I mean, part of our campaign at She's Electric is trying to identify designs that work well for women, and we've had a number of events where we have different e-bikes that we've selected because we feel like they work well and they're not intimidating. Lighter bikes, lower step through, compact, long tail cargo bikes that feel more approachable maybe than a bigger front-loading cargo bike. And it's really interesting to see how different women react to different designs and what they're drawn to and what they feel safe on. And it's been great testing designs here today and just seeing that. And it's inclusive design, not just design for women, but just seeing some of those issues being addressed. And I've already been raving about Natalia's trailers. I just cycled around the test track, and there's a huge trailer on the back, and I couldn't feel it at all. I could turn absolutely beautifully. I was like, is this some kind of magic trick? Like, it's insane. So it's that kind of thing that I think is just so innovative. And also another model that I tried that is covered, so weatherproof, and the designer said that safety and comfort is at the heart of their design, and I just feel it's those kind of advancements, particularly in the UK, where women aren't used to cargo bikes, that will help adoption in the designs.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's inclusive design, so I think lots of all manufacturers have to do UX design and test and analysis, so user experience, and understand who is the user. Are we specifically designing for one particular group, or are we designing for everyone? And UX design is such an important part of the product development, and you can extend your product range. You can say, okay, this is designed specifically for the kids. This is designed for women. It's different countries, different infrastructure. So there are lots of things that manufacturers of cargo bikes, us electric trailers should think while we're developing the product. And I think also it's quite interesting is that you mentioned bicycle industry, but actually, let's think back and think about auto industry, car industry. I sometimes feel, as I am a woman running in the cargo bike industry, the company, developing cargo trailers, and there is very little representation. So I'm really happy to be here in this panel, and you can see the parallels with the car development industry, that up to date, or the early cars were developed by men for men, and it is so. But we don't have to repeat the mistakes of the past, which are, 100 years old. And also up to date, so vehicle manufacturing industry is very masculine, male-dominated, and still the advertising today, the communication, it's all about freedom. It's very, very masculine, and it's something that's there, and it's a tradition, it's a history. but I don't think that we have to repeat the same mistakes and learn from them. And I just read recently that in the whole car manufacturing industry, we had only one woman CEO up today. Yes, and this is how it is. And it's been Mary Barry from the Ford Motors. And it's been only like 2016, I think. It's not that far. So I think it's the whole, how the industry itself, so vehicle manufacturing, not just bikes, the car, it comes from the car manufacturing. And I think this is a time when we should rethink, we should we should think about more inclusive design, more diversity in design, not just, representation, but also thinking about the design, inclusive service, to be able to empower more people to cycle, not just women, but just in general, more people.
Dr. Beyk, fortunately, is a gender-neutral term, but you haven't considered calling the business Mrs. Beyk or Madam Beyk or...
No. No, I don't think it's necessary. I do think, like I said, in Amsterdam, women aren't underrepresented anyway. I think some companies may need to learn how to approach women a little bit better and how to advise women better, because there are plenty of bikes that are suitable, but not all salesmen will be able to deal with a female customer. So I think awareness is a very big thing, and I don't know if we should be doing that part, or that the men that are a little bit more aware should spread the word for us. But for sure, there's plenty of potential, and I think if other countries start picking it up, and if the industry starts involving women, maybe they don't need to design, but they should be consulted and involved in the process more.
I have a question for Anna-Karina. You mentioned, Natalia, the underrepresentation of women in the cycling industry. This is something that has been bothering us as an organization for many years, and we do make an effort, for instance, at the Velocity conference, to see to it that we have a almost perfect gender balance in speakers, people on stage, in panels, etc. And as I was wondering, Anna-Karina, whether you could tell a bit about the Women in Cycling Network.
Absolutely.
To the extent that you are not all aware of it.
Yeah, if you're not part of the Women in Cycling Network, I would absolutely love to invite you to join. We launched it a few years ago together with a few other organizations. And the main goal is just to make more visibility for women working in the cycling sector. And some of the concrete measures that we have taken, we, for example, have a LinkedIn group which you can join, where you can post and we can just exchange a few experiences. We also have an expertise portal where you can register yourself and your expertise, and it is specifically designed for conference organizers who are maybe lacking women speakers. So they can go to that portal and then filter by the expertise, and through that they can then find the women speakers, because they're definitely out there. They're just underrepresented. And we also have a very strict no mana policy at the Velocity conference, and that's also something we try to encourage through this Women in Cycling initiative. So on every single panel at the Velocity conference, there will be at least one woman, and this has proven to be extremely effective, because a few years ago we maybe had 30 to 37% women at Velocity conferences, and this year in Leipzig we had a record number of 45%.
So, and that was my point, because we often get to hear, yeah, but we cannot find any woman who can participate in this or that expert panel. But now we have a roster of more than 500 possible speakers, all women. So we don't buy that any longer. And I think Jos behind me here, he got the message as well. We go back to cycling. We all know that cycling patterns are very different between men and women. You know, men they do a single trip to work, and at the end of the day they go back. They don't carry much stuff, whereas women, many women, they make these multiple stop trips or multiple trips, delivering or picking up kids, doing groceries, being a caregiver, what have you. And there's a whole body of research on this. So we are here at the Cargo Bike Festival, and isn't it actually that cargo bikes are much more suited to the female travel pattern than the male travel pattern? Can you reflect on that? It's up to you who wants to start.
Yeah, maybe I can just quickly start. No, definitely. I think that cargo bikes are very well suited to the travel patterns of women because they're just so versatile. And as Henk mentioned, very often women tend to do chain trips on their way to work. So they have to drop off their children because most of the care responsibility do still fall on women. So they can just use one vehicle for all those purposes, from carrying children to carrying groceries, anything really.
Yes, I agree. I do think that in the industry there are some players that are more aware of the need to be versatile than others. So hopefully somebody's listening and realizing that if their boxes are only suitable for cargo and there's no way to convert it, that they're missing out on a huge potential and a growing potential if all my colleagues over here succeed on getting more women on bikes, then for sure the problem for those players is going to get bigger. So, yeah, for sure.
A follow-up question for you, Eva. When you get a young family into your shop, dad, mum, baby in a sling, maybe, they're going to select a cargo bike. Who is taking the decision?
Ultimately, the woman, because she's the primary user.
That's good to hear.
We do see some very stubborn men trying to make some illogic decisions, but in the end, we do see them losing.
Great, that's great. Thank you.
You know, earlier you mentioned, if we, in case of you men, should sell, or we women, or I think Eva, you mentioned that too. I thought it's really interesting, and I think it's my colleague once mentioned, because we are being at exhibitions and shows of the cargo bikes, and for instance, if I'm there at the booth and I'm small woman, and if I'm actually showing that there is a trailer and I'm using it, so I think it's something, it's pretty much, there is a credibility, there is a trust. So it's not the man, the big one and tall, who moves the big trailer and 300 kilograms. It's me, a small woman, who is moving it with one finger. It kind of, creates a trust, and that it's, so there is something about it when, I speak to customers, female customers. So I think in general we need more representation and women working in the industry, not just actually women, just like it has to be more balanced. Could be also gender neutral. Could be LGBTQ community. It just doesn't have to be male dominated. And within this industry, I think if we have more representation for different jobs as well, so not just private use of the cargo bikes, as we already have this long history in Denmark and the Netherlands, but also think about all this last mile logistics. Right, it's very masculine because you have to move. There is a lot of miles. You have to be strong physically, and I think this is what we want to at Nüwiel, bring this change. So it's not just private use, but also female representation in this cargo bike, last mile logistics, and service of the bikes, and in developing of the bikes. So the whole complete value chain of the cargo cycling industry or cargo bike industry.
Thank you.
We found through our customers, and that's one of the reasons we launched the She's Electric campaign, that women were moving towards electric bikes and electric cargo bikes, and that it was a very useful vehicle that was enabling women who wouldn't cycle without that vehicle. So I think there's massive potential for more women to adopt them. I think some of the problems we have in the UK, again, it's representation. So it's kind of, it's really to change the image, and this is a great time and opportunity to do it, because if we can get that image out there of women using them more, and more people see that and identify with that. I think in terms of the trip chaining, the problem that we have again with the infrastructure is the stopping and the parking, and that's definitely a problem. But if you're doing the school run and then going into town, it's like working out how you can actually get that vehicle, park it safely, know it's going to be secure, to be able to enable that. So I think that needs to these things, the infrastructure needs to come along with the messaging at the same time to get that shift to happen.
I think from my perspective, by around 2030, there'll be nearly 1 billion people living in Africa. About 60% of those people will be women. And we don't have enough data on how we actually will be using cargo bikes. There just isn't enough studies in my markets to really start looking at behavioral patterns. So from my perspective, probably the cargo bikes of the future just don't exist yet for when I look at like majority of the world. So I think it's difficult to say how it would be used and how we can catalyze that. But I think the starting point really is having more use cases invested in, so we start to understand where can it be used and designing for that.
Do you have any data on women using your Wahu bikes?
Yeah, but not material enough. No. And I think it's going on. We've been looking at like last mile logistics patterns of just moving goods from A to B in general. But that's still based on the way we're currently moving. And that's not the way that we want to move in the future. So I think this is the interesting part of where we stand now is we know people are going to change how they move, but there's not enough information on where we should start even designing. So there's lots of different use cases that we're now starting to pop up, but not at enough scale to really look at how do we make that material shift from an industry perspective. But if I was looking at like the cargo bikes I've seen here, they just can't be adapted to my context. Like a $9,000 or euro cargo bike is like an annual salary. So,
thank you. And we go back to Anna-Karina, and you can slowly pass the mic back, because Anna-Karina, you know everything about cargo bike friendly cities. And I was wondering, I should ask you whether in those cities, whether issues like inclusiveness play a role, whether there are cities which actually have a policy of inclusiveness regarding cargo bikes, and then maybe the rest of the others on the panel can reflect on what should, because we've been talking about industry, we've been talking about the customers, the clients, ourselves. What's the role of public authorities in closing the cycling gender gap, if you like?
So in a lot of work I do is looking at how cargo bike friendly cities are and what makes a city cargo bike friendly. So I do data collection on that, but I think it's just about keeping it in mind, no matter what you do and what you're implementing. From incentive schemes to make sure that they're also made for low-income families and to target them directly at those who are most underrepresented in cycling. But also, if you have a call for tender for a cargo bike sharing scheme, maybe make sure that those shared cargo bikes also have a child seat, or that there are cargo bikes for people with reduced mobility in that fleet. And then there are also a lot of projects or programs you could implement as a city, for example, training programs specifically targeted at families or women. And very often we also see this cargo bike used as a tool for outreach in communities and cities. For example, there are cities in Austria where they have a cargo bike for providing information for women that maybe need to access certain programs that have been affected by domestic violence, for example. So it's also a very important outreach tool. But what I would say is just that whenever you think about any policy, really implementing anything, just think holistically, think of everyone and the needs of women and those underrepresented in cycling.
And you don't have to go down the line in the right order. So if there's somebody says, yeah, I want to say something. Yeah, here you go.
Yes. So yeah, we're talking to a few local authorities and to work in partnership with them, and this comes back to the point of affordability as well. Yeah, who can afford a $9,000 cargo bike? Like, not that many people. So it's got to be mainstream, it's got to be accessible, and this is where I think government, local authorities need to step in, and we're we're starting conversations on trying to have some kind of subsidy model where we work alongside local authority for rental subsidies. And I feel like that the potential of that is massive for opening up the usage and just reducing or getting rid of that upfront cost, because then you've only got a small fraction of people who are going to participate.
I think policymakers and governors could do much more than just, incentives and financial support. And, if we think about the cities in general today, there are so many ways a person can move from A to B. We use subways, we use buses, electric bikes, electric scooters. But when we think about moving heavy and bulky goods, it's just only one way, it's cars. So obviously there is something can be done by policymakers to change this. And it's not only manufacturers of cargo cycling solutions to do that. And I think this is what we see today in London and Paris. There is a movement to ban streets from diesel cars, to provide tax incentives, to create more pedestrian zones. Because I think what we forget, that the cities that we live in today are not for cars. They are for people. And if we are in Germany, so if I walk in Hamburg or Berlin, I can see in the 2 rows cars parked right and left. And when the car is leaving, there's just so much space for walking. And it's the truth. And I think one of the way would be for the government, and this is what they're doing, just changing the cities, making them more green, making them free from cars, just opening them up for people. Obviously, if there is a financial incentive as well, it's great, but there is much more to do to incentivize all different people to cycle and be able to move yourself or your kids, bulky goods, heavy goods from A to B in the cities. And honestly, I think if we think about future cities and smart cities and green cities, sustainable, diverse, we can't get there if we still have the same mentality of driving a car or redesigning the cars and trucks over and over again and using them in cities. So I think it's much, much more that policymakers can do in terms of the urban planning.
You're talking about incentives, carrots, right? Should we also have sticks?
I don't know. Well, we have sticks, right? I mean, obviously there are fines. There is. I think in Brussels and Paris they implemented. There is a. If you use a diesel, I don't remember. I don't drive, so I can't say. But if you use a diesel car to sort of in the city, you get taxed, right? So there are sticks already implemented. I don't know if more sticks should come, but I am a person who is rather empowering than punishing. So I think if our governments, cities can empower rather than punish, I think it's just much bigger incentive to create more awareness and create more diversity on the road. Yeah.
Valerie?
Yeah, I think it needs to be a bit of a balance, and the balance needs to look a bit more globally in terms of you can have sticks in Germany where you say, don't use your diesel vans. Then all those diesel vans get on a ship to Accra. And so then it kills the market there. And then we need incentives on how to, counterbalance that. So I think what we need is something that really looks at a bit more holistically in the system. At the moment, everything is really focused on individual countries. But if you're looking at the transition being meaningful for the world, it has to be a balance that says, okay, we will give you a stick for don't drive your diesel truck, but we'll give you a carrot for disposing of it responsibly, and an even higher level for picking up a new innovation of how you move goods from A to B. So I think that's what excites me if we can look at from policy from that perspective.
We're in Amsterdam here, and Amsterdam removes 1,300 parking spots every year, year on year on year on year. It's really attrition, let's say. And that does work, or making it simply difficult to drive through the city, which slowly is pushing the cars outside of the city center, and parking rates which are prohibitively high at 10 euros an hour. That's 240 a day That's more than a hotel room. A lot more. So there we go. I want to open the floor to questions from the audience. And I know it's late, and I know that they're starting to break down the stand. But here we are. My faithful question asker.
Hello, this from Oxford again. You are all doing such incredible stuff, and you are incredibly inspirational as well. And of course, at the end of this conference, we're all going to go back home and be faced with some of us are going to be faced with some of our amazing challenges. And those of you who are lucky enough to live in already very bicycling friendly countries, you are our dream, basically. You're where we want to be. I wanted a little bit even more inspiration if I possibly can. We all know we've gone through our own cycling journeys, and maybe the pennies dropped for each of us, or we've had that light bulb moment where we suddenly go, oh, cargo biking is the answer to everything, even the questions I didn't know that I had. If I need a one or two extra little stories, maybe can you tell me of maybe one of your biggest wins over the last 12 months? It doesn't have to be a huge thing, even maybe just somebody who you've seen them get on the bike, see what you've done, some little change. So for instance, with me, it was visiting my local cargo bike shop and him saying, we had the August rush. We sold 8 extra cargo bikes this year for people whose kids are just starting in school. And it was seeing the brand new cargo bikes in September on the school run and seeing, wow, a few years ago, ours was the only cargo bike, and now cargo bikes are, there's lots of them outside the school gates, and that felt like a big win to me. So if you could just share, you don't have to maybe, but if you've just got something, that little kind of what made you feel really, really good, made it happen for you, something in the last 12 months.
Thank you, Liz, for that great question, where we will get some inspiration from you all.
So maybe I'll start and then you can jump for the mic. I've had like a fascinating 12 months, but there's one particular moment that just stood out for me. So we provide fleets to Bolt in our market, and I was sitting at home really tired, one of my days off, and my husband had just ordered some food to the house. And then he started shouting, Val, come outside. And so I thought it was an emergency. So barefoot, ran outside. And then the delivery was the first delivery that I got on one of my riders. And we basically danced in the street. And then the delivery rider was so excited. And so it was just a real moment for me. And he was excited, but he was still a bit cool about it. So everything was cool. When we finished, we took some pictures. And then I went to sit down and eat my lunch. And then about an hour later, I got a phone call from my head of fleet, a lady called Farida. And she said that the rider dropped a video on the rider group, a selfie of how he felt delivering to me. And it was just so lovely because you do a lot of PowerPoint presentations and stuff, but just to see it actually come to life and see that he was as excited as I was because he really got what we're trying to build. And that was a real moment for me. Yeah.
I think the events that we did in the summer, just those one-on-one engagements are so special when you have a woman who's come to the event, has not ever tried an e-bike, e-cargo bike before. One particular woman who was in her 60s, hadn't cycled. She couldn't even remember when she last cycled, though she hadn't cycled for many years. But she was so gung-ho, and she got on board of the Benno Remi Demi, and she was just flying around the field and looked so happy and so proud of herself. And she said to me afterwards, I was interested in e-bikes, but I just, no one was talking to me about it. I didn't know where to start. But she'd seen a flyer for our event, and I feel like it's those individual interactions that instigate behaviour change that just give me the goosebump moments for sure.
Not 12 months, but last year we won a public tender with Belgian Post, and probably 2 years ago. But today we have 400 e-trailers in Belgium being used in 60 different locations. And thank you. And interestingly, differently from the parcel industry, within the postal industry, 50% women who, 50% people who deliver mail are women. So it's actually, there is a great women representation. I think it's such a great thing that through our technology and product, we enable them to be able to transport more, not only lightweight mail, but also small parcels, and without making any effort. And by delivering the e-trailers to Belgian Post, we help them to be faster, to be more cost efficient, and also save 97% of the CO2 emissions, 77% of the fine particles, and reduce noise by 49% in cities. And thank you. So this is what we want to continue doing, and city by city, country by country, to support the cargo cycling, but also empower more people to be able to do their job, which requires physical strength.
I don't think of something for myself. I'm happy on my cargo bike every day, thank God. But your stories are so inspirational. I'm trying to think of something. And there's one customer that stood out to me over the past months, which is a lady who has a dog walking company. And she recently stopped using the van. And she has a special built Urban Arrow tender with a cage in the back where she can has like 4 cages for the dogs that she picks up. And I asked her, I was like, don't you mind getting wet because you're out with the dogs the whole day, and doesn't it get tiring? And she's like, no, I love it. It's such a much more freedom, and I get my own air out, not only when I'm walking with the dogs, but also picking up. And she was so positive. And a beautiful bike too, very different than all the other bikes. And it just shows that if you think it, you can do it. Because I wouldn't have thought of a dog walking tender, but she did, and she's loving it.
I would be looking forward into the first research into the mental well-being and mental health of van drivers as compared to cargo bike riders. That should yield some interesting results.
For me, a big moment was launching the Cargo Bike Friendly Cities dashboard, of course, because I was working on that for months just at my desk doing the research. And then what happened afterwards is that at conferences, like complete strangers came up to me. It was like, oh, you're the one who did the dashboard. So all like that was just a really big moment for me. Also because these people are saying, oh, we're actually using this tool to think of policies and to look for best practices, and just seeing that my work had such a concrete impact was simply amazing.
So thank you very much to all of you, Anna-Karina, Eva, Natalia, Kaz, and Valerie. Can we have a big hand?